Xbox just got a massive price increase. Clair Obscur Expedition 33 is huge, Arc Raiders previews, and what it was like trying to pre-order a Switch 2 at midnight. I'm David Lum.
And I'm Sean Booker. This is Obvious Skill Issue, and each episode we're bringing you the latest news on games and game hardware, as well as a behind-the-scenes look at the biggest game events all year and our first-hand impressions on upcoming titles. So we just got word of a massive price increase from Xbox pretty much across the brand. What are your thoughts, David?
Well, Microsoft is not saying that this is because of tariffs, but it's pretty much because of tariffs. Sony had already announced price increases for the PlayStation, for the PS5 outside the US, so this is kind of unsurprising. But to see it across the board and to have different price increases around the world is kind of an indicator of where we are as an industry. So not surprised, but a little bummed, especially since Xbox is running so far behind in this console generation.
Yeah, so up to this point, we have seen price increases from PlayStation and Xbox outside of North America, because North America is kind of like the main battleground that is like prioritized above the rest. And in fact, PlayStation, we've seen a couple price increases at this point, but let's run through what Xbox is doing here. These are all US dollars for reference. So an Xbox Series S, which used to be $300, is now $380. A Series X, which was $500, is now $600, and then the just recently released last year, the 2TB Galaxy Black Xbox Series X, which launched at $600, is now a whopping $730. And then it's not just the consoles either. Let's talk about some accessories. Controllers went from $60 to $65, a $5 increase. The Xbox wireless headset, which was $110, is now $120. So that's not really that surprising. We just saw Nintendo increase their peripheral prices last month directly in relation to tariffs. Another reason why tariffs are probably the main reason for this. And then the big kind of question that surprised a lot of people is they announced that, quote, some first-party Xbox titles are going to be increasing to $80 from $70 this holiday, which means Mario Kart World is no longer the only $80 game.
Mm-hmm. And I think that's going to be the big thing that pisses off a lot of gamers, frankly. When Nintendo did this with Mario Kart World, gamers were up in arms because they're worried it was a harbinger of things to come. Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, that's the case. And it's a question of whether this, tariff stuff really moved the needle a lot for them, or they just use it as an excuse to bump up games. But I do think that $80 is going to be our new premium and or first party sort of baseline for how pricey games get. And we're going to see that and feel it in the wallet this holiday season.
Game prices went up to $70. They used to be $60 last gen. So now we're already seeing a bump yet again halfway through this generation, which does not bode well for the future. Luckily with Xbox games or pretty much anything non-Nintendo, those games will eventually go on sale, but it is a harder pill to swallow on Nintendo's side, because at most you get maybe a $20 discount, and that can be years and years later. The big question is whether Sony is going to follow suit over here in North America. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, they have to. Or at least they've got a big enough door that they're not the first person to do it. Nintendo definitely got pilloried for it. They were the first one to walk into that live fire. Microsoft is not going to get as much heat for it. Sony might as well. And they pride themselves on their exclusives, so there's really no reason for them not to. We're going to look at future, Naughty Dog games. We're going to look at future, Horizon games, future God of War games, future Spider-Man games. Even if these things come to other platforms, if they debut on Sony first, as is their strategy, you might as well raise these prices, because where else are you going to get these games, at least at first? Stuff like Final Fantasy VII Rebirth had a 1-year exclusivity on Sony PlayStation 5, so yeah, it makes sense for them to follow.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised, and Sony typically is the more expensive of the three, because outside of Nintendo, they're beating Xbox 3-1 in terms of console sales, so they can kind of set and do whatever they want, and people will pay for it, unfortunately. But this does bring up a big question and a kind of a value proposition around Game Pass. Even though, if we look at games this holiday that are probably coming out, it's maybe the new Gears, Outer Worlds 2. Those are like some of the big first-party ones that are kind of just on the horizon here from Xbox. Those will still launch directly into Game Pass, and we saw that like Oblivion was shadow dropped like last week. Game Pass is not getting a price increase. It definitely has gotten several in the years previous, but nothing announced this week. It makes Game Pass a much like better value if the standalone cost of these games goes up.
Yeah, even last week we had Oblivion and Clair Obscur drop, and both of them are on Game Pass. If you could pay $80 for one game or get, what is that, 5-6 months of Game Pass on that, depending on which, tier you pick. Now we could see that price go up too, but so far, these tariffs are really impacting physical sales and physical media. So it's not surprising that they are, mostly hitting accessories and stuff. So it doesn't, I wouldn't be surprised if Game Pass becomes even more of a value add. And, we've got other Xbox games coming out, right? We've got Fable, perhaps, Perfect Dark, perhaps, that are coming out later this year. I don't think that price increase is going to hit Doom the Dark Ages, which is coming out May 13th. But if you're looking at $80 games, among Xbox's studio retinue coming out in 2025, I don't know, Game Pass looks better and better.
I think we need to talk about the Switch 2 pre-order situation. It went live. It happened since we last did an episode here. I'm curious, David, did you stay up to midnight? Did you pre-order a Switch 2?
All right, I'm eating crow here. I totally said I was going to pre-order a Switch 2, and instead I updated my beautiful PC. So I spent a lot more money on that than buying a Switch 2. But I also looked at the stable of games, and I was like, maybe I'll hold off for now. And then I saw you guys doing your midnight Switch 2 pre-orders. How did that go, Sean?
Yeah, so luckily I'm on the West Coast, so I only had to stay up till like 9 p.m. when stuff went live. So shout outs to all of our East Coast coworkers who had to actually do the midnight thing. But it was pretty much a complete like disaster and a mess. The retailers that went live at midnight was Walmart, Best Buy, and Target, with Target kind of like actually going live first. Best Buy was just like quiet, and then Walmart set up this like line system that never went anywhere. So I'm assuming they were just lying to us at that point. But everyone got in. Since Target went first, pretty much everyone like on Blue Sky was hammering Target, and like I got all the way to the checkout thing, and I'm clicking it, and just nothing happened. That's when Best Buy comes in. They went live probably around 9:30 or 12:30 on the East Coast. And that one worked for me. I was pretty lucky. I got in pretty quick through Best Buy, pre-ordered my Switch 2. Obviously, I got the Mario Kart edition because that's a no-brainer. Still, nothing ever happened with Walmart. I actually did end up getting a couple of accessories through Walmart. I got the Pro Controller and that goofy Piranha Plant camera.
I mean, we're not the only ones to be like super wary and confused about the tariff situation affecting the Switch 2. Some commenters on YouTube talked about this sort of anxiety. At Insohapo said, I know I pre-ordered because who knows what this economy will look like in the next 100 days to a year. The way things look now, the Switch 2 may be more expensive in the near future. I can't disagree with that. Lock in your prices now. And that's sort of what we're hearing from analysts in other fields. PCs, phones and stuff. They're expecting price hikes at some point, but there's so much inventory now in the US that, hopefully in the next, 5, 6, 8 weeks, prices will stay moderately the same. But, you can't say that in the future. We don't know how this tariff situation is going to evolve.
Right now, we're joined by IGN Tech Reviews editor Michael Higham to talk about the surprise hit Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Michael, thank you for joining us.
Of course, I'm always happy to collab with y'all.
We all have been playing this for a few weeks now. It's become one of my favorite RPGs of all time. David, where are you at with Clair?
Loving it so far. It's a real breath of fresh air, but I can't really pinpoint. I think it's a lot of things that make me love it, not just one or two things. It's not just the system. It's not just the, graphics. It's not just the choral music in the background. What did you think, Mike?
I'm kind of with both of y'all. I'm kind of with everyone across the board where it feels like a full package where every single piece of the game was carefully considered. And I say this in my review on IGN, is that it feels like this game was like properly scoped and scaled and focused on the things that mattered most. And this game kind of being not just an homage to the Japanese RPGs of yore, but also kind of their own spin on it and a modernization of a lot of things that we love about Japanese RPGs, or the 90s classic RPGs, really. It feels like they paid attention to every single detail, and they know what you want out of it, when the music hits, the kinds of boss battles you have, the kinds of mechanics you like, the characterizations, story beats, just so many small details that really round out this package that really feels like, you know, they understand what people love about the genre, but what they love about the genre, and just put all of that into a game with their own, you know, culture on it, their own stories they want to tell. So it's just like this almost perfect amalgamation of what they want, what they wanted to do, and their own identity, and just doing it their own way. It's such an impressive package.
Let's take a quick step back. David, I know you reviewed it for here at CNET. What exactly is Clair Obscur for someone who may have just been hearing about this game now?
Yeah, Clair Obscur Expedition 33, which is a title that doesn't make sense until you play the game, is a quote-unquote JRPG. It's a role-playing game, but it's inspired by Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, etc. Players take on the role of citizens in a pseudo-fantasy French island nation that has their life ticking down one by one every year by a colossal villain they call the Paintress that is reducing humanity's lifespan. And so to fight against this darkness, they send these expeditions. So you're part of Expedition 33, featuring a host of very French-coded characters going out into the beyond to fight and take down this villain. Yes, it's a JRPG. You go to fight God. But there's an incredible turn-based system that incorporates quote-unquote Souls-like elements. You get to parry enemy attacks as they come in or dodge them. And it's so interactive. There's so much music. There's so much everything.
I don't want to get too spoilery with it, but let's start with you, Michael. Favorite moment in the game?
Ooh, man, that's tough. It's tough in a game that is built on big moments.
For sure.
I guess, you know, I've spoilers considered, right? We don't want to do that. But
Sure.
I always think about this one moment where both Gustav and Maël, who are two really core characters in the party, and there's this kind of social link type moment at camp where they're just throwing rocks into the ocean and just winding down, whatever. They're just having conversation, reminiscing about what life was like before the expedition. And Maël kind of like pokes fun at Gustav for being kind of like this flirt back home, and like how he was like trying to holla at all the girls back in Lumiere, and Gustav, like, he has like this sense of self-deprecation. He was like, Maël was like, hey, back then you was trying to talk to all the girls, and he was like, hey, but they wasn't trying to talk to me. And I was like, it's like a little goof. It's funny, but the reason why I think of that moment is because it's indicative of how good the acting is in this game. Not just the voice acting, but the motion capture. And like, one of the big points I make in my review is that the facial capture, the subtle expressions, and the way they deliver their lines, and all those subtle details really round out the story. Like, these smaller moments wouldn't hit. You wouldn't really like, I feel like I wouldn't fall in love with these characters in the same way if it wasn't for those small details. You know, you have big actors like Andy Serkis and Charlie Cox, great actors like Ben Starr, Jennifer English, who are all part of this cast. But it's not just their voices, it's the way these characters are motion captured, the way their faces move in these close-ups and these cutscenes, and it really sells you on the idea that this really is a human story. So I think back to that moment because it is a microcosm of everything else that this game does so well.
I was just going to pick the Gestrels, who I think are the goofiest, loveliest little like side characters.
They are.
You know, comic relief, but also just like exaggerations, right? Caricatures in this world, but they're also very French. They are, you know, these sort of, it took me a while to realize that they are paintbrush heads.
Mm-hmm.
These little wooden figures, if you've ever, you know, been in an art store and you see the sort of like articulated wooden figures, they're just like that. For
and
figure
they love
drawing.
fighting.
They love fighting. They're just, you know, little goofy guys, but they also have a form of permanence and longevity. They have this sort of rebirth cycle. So even though they're, you know, a culture built on, you know, battling each other and possibly breaking each other apart, they're always sort of coming back. And I think that's a surreality that the game really, you know, imbues in its character.
I'm going to say two, actually, because this first one is pretty spoilery, so I can't really talk too much about it. But the end of Act 1, beginning of Act 2 is nuts. They do some stuff with the plot there that I just did not see coming, and I was even telling David, like, you have to get to this part before you start talking about this game. I cannot believe what they just did to this group. And then the other one I'll give a shout out to is just kind of every interaction between Verso and Monaco. They have such a good chemistry, the two of them, and they just both they fought each other for years and stuff, but they're like best friends. I laughed a ton with those two's interactions. But I want to talk about the combat system because that's one of the more unique and kind of flashy parts about it. It's kind of similar to, like, I don't know, the Mario RPGs or Paper Mario, where there's a lot of active time elements about it. Michael, I'm curious your thoughts. How did you find the combat?
Ooh, man, they were cooking with this one. It was. Yeah. I think for me, I was excited on the outset when this game was first revealed because you saw that as much in the trailers. And for me, I grew up on, the Final Fantasies and the Chrono Trigger, but there's some of Mario RPGs that, like, the active element was so important to me. Like, I love a good turn-based combat system, but if you can get me invested in enemy turns and not just waiting for them to do their thing, like, that's, now there's there's so many moments in this game where I would sit forward in my chair and, like, square my shoulders. And this game did that to me. Not many I love turn-based RPGs, my favorite genre, but very few of them make me want to sit forward or need to sit forward. And I think it's such an important piece of the game. You can knock the difficulty down to story mode and not have to worry about that. But I play it on normal. You really need to lock in, and you really need to, like, get that timing down. And I like Souls games too, and that might be a turnoff for people, but that's what that difficulty mode is for. But when you can incorporate that on top of like a pretty complex but not overwhelming combat system where how you have to set up your party members with their different abilities and how you're supposed to synergize with them throughout your various turns. But when it's an enemy turn, it's like, oh, okay, now this is a different phase of the fight. So keeping you on your toes throughout a turn-based combat system is kind of a hard thing to do.
No, that's a great point, Michael. Like, one of the worst parts of making a build in an RPG is, especially when one that goes crazy on status effects is like, oh, this is a boss is immune to poison, immune to death, whatever. And I'm so glad that this game leans so hard. They're not going to cheap you out with, like, well, you had a cool turn coming up, but here's 10 shields, Like, that is few and far between. The game wants you to break it.
And you'd mentioned, like, Souls-like games, and I think that's a great kind of comparison when you incorporate the dodging and the parrying, because a lot of these enemies, especially the bosses, you need to kind of memorize their attack patterns. And okay, if he swings up first, I know it's going to be a 5-hit combo, but the last hit he's going to delay it, so I need to wait for that parry, because you can only successfully do the counterattack if you parry everything up to that point. So there's a real, like, emphasis on learning all of the animations and whatnot. And it actually makes me really miss something that we were given in Metaphor last year, where you could restart a battle just immediately, because there's so much of it, like, trial and error with a lot of these enemy combos, that it would have been really nice to have that. So that's kind of like my one knock against the game, but it's a minor thing. All right, last question I have for you guys. What was the party you kind of stuck with? Let's start with you, David.
Lune is great. I love her magic system.
Oh, yeah.
The stains are super, super fun to just sort of chain attacks and make me think differently about the spells she's using. CL is an early game addition. She's fantastic. Just the combination of just the foretell system and then the uber healing, the party-wide healing is super clutch. But Monaco is definitely someone that surprised me as I am playing. I'm literally, like, I have not finished the game. I'm about 25 hours in. But his roulette of abilities is just so fun. This is the Blue Mage, and he, like, just getting the ability to take on enemy capabilities is wild, and you can make some really cool stuff with his wheel of stuff.
I turned this game into the magical girl RPG that I've always wanted, man. Okay. It was Lune, CL, and Mael, and it's not just, like, I think that they're some of my favorite characters, but I found a way to have them all, like, synergize with each other, where I would have Lune go first, burn the enemy, then use one of Mael's moves that gets her into her virtuoso stance if the enemy is burnt, and then CL setting up her card system. But sticking with them, I figured out the thing that I want to do with them. With Mael, it's like her sword ballet, which is I think it's like a 9-hit combo, but you got to get 9 AP with it. And when she's in virtuous stance with 200% damage, and I have like her luck set to like 60%, so she's likely to do crit damage on those hits, dog, Mael was doing the most damage.
And then for me, it seems like we all did Lune and CL, and then I did Verso, so I got the other character there. I liked having CL to do my dark damage, and then for my light damage, I had Verso, so they kind of worked opposite each other. And then you talk about kind of like a job system. I had Verso set up like my shooter, basically. Anytime I needed to like hit the left trigger and target a weak point or whatever it is, I put all of the shooting stuff on him so that he would just do massive damage, light them on fire, mark them every time he took a shot. So that was kind of his role. Well, I'm going to wrap it up there. Michael, thank you for joining us. For those watching, Clair Obscur is on everything. It's on Game Pass, so it's easy to pop into. I'm sure all of us are going to be talking about this game for pretty late into this year. A lot of people are excited.
Yeah, definitely go check out our review and Michael's review over on IGN. Thank you so much, Michael, for coming and chatting Clair Obscur with us.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Our third host chair rotates once again, and we're now joined by CNET's Tyler Graham to talk about previewing Arc Raiders. Tyler, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Sean. Thanks for having me, David.
So yeah, give me kind of the rundown. What exactly is Arc Raiders?
For sure. So Arc Raiders is the newest extraction shooter. There is a big draw to this game, which is that there are robots as the PvE enemy. So a lot of these extraction shooters are PvPvE, where you launch into different maps and you loot and you run into other people and you fight other people, but there are enemies on the map as well. And with Arc Raiders, those enemies are these robots that drop down from space. And a lot of the big draws of Arc Raiders that make it very different from other extraction shooters are that there is a third-person camera perspective instead of a first-person camera perspective, which makes it a bit more of a strategic. You look around corners at people, you kind of look around for robots, you make sure that you're safe. But I think the biggest draw for this game that differentiates it from other extraction shooters is that there are these giant robots, these raid bosses, where once you finally get geared up enough, you start looking to run into these with other people on your team.
Extraction shooters are generally where you jump in with some loot and you try to make it out with a lot of loot, a lot more that you find on the ground. So that's a loop that adds a lot of risk, reward. How did you feel that really set up in this in Arc Raiders?
In Arc Raiders, I feel like the looting cycle is a little bit friendlier than in other extraction shooters. Similar extraction shooters like Escape from Tarkov, they let you come in with these free loadouts, and Arc Raiders lets you do that as well. So if you're just beginning and you don't have any loot and you're dropping in, you could choose this free loadout, which lets you start with randomized equipment when you're dropping into the map. But with something like Escape from Tarkov, when you do that, it kind of puts you on this timer, where once you choose that loadout and you drop in, if you get got by another player immediately, or in Arc Raiders, if you got by like a robot immediately, in Escape from Tarkov, if that were to happen to you, there's a timer where you're not available to drop in with another free loadout immediately, which feels really bad, especially if you get got it towards the beginning of the match. In Arc Raiders, the free loadouts, you're able to drop right back in immediately, and so it creates this kind of something maybe more similar to a battle royale, where if you got in Arc Raiders, you're able to go right back in and just start looting again, which means there's very little downtime. You're able to keep looting, and it feels really good compared to other extraction shooters.
Yeah, so you had mentioned Marathon, and we talked about the gameplay reveal on our last episode, which I was thinking one of the ways that Marathon was going to stand out. Now that I've played a bit of the alpha, it's developed by Bungie. They're known for making a shooter feel really good. So is Arc Raiders, does it feel good? How's that going to compete?
I was actually impressed by Arc Raiders gunplay. It felt to me very kinetic and weighty, but the weapons don't necessarily feel cumbersome. They feel hefty, but not cumbersome. So you have these weapons that have a lot of impact, almost I would say maybe the same way that Bungie's weapons have impact when you fire them and you get these hits and you really feel like the crunch of those hits. The physics engine of arc raiders is kind of working overtime, especially when you're firing on the arc robots. They'll like wheel out and like recoil. There's like these quadcopter rotor kind of robots that you can see in the sky, and when you fire on those, they'll like kind of recoil and fly backward before like crashing to the ground. And it makes the weapons and the gunplay feel really good. When you're fighting other players, there's kind of like energy shields in the game, similar to like a game like Halo. And when you fire, or I guess like Fortnite, because you have to recharge them using items. But when you fire on people, there's like these blue like sparks that fly off them, and it makes the gunplay feel like really satisfying and rewarding when you hit your shots, for sure.
I was in the same preview, but they started us off in solo, sort of wandering around the maps alone before they squatted us up. What is your perspective on the solo versus squad play?
In extraction shooters, I think that kind of balance is something that can be hard to strike, the balance between solo and squad play. And so, in our preview, everyone was playing solo at the same time. So things felt, for the most part, very fair. Every once in a while, you would run into people that met during the match, got on proximity chat, and if they squatted up, it was harder to take them down. Which I don't know how often that would happen outside of a press preview, because people are very motivated by getting loot and taking each other out.
I want to hear more about these like boss encounters that you'd mentioned, because I didn't know about this beforehand. Does this happen every single match, or like what's the deal with that?
It doesn't happen every match. When you launch into a match of Arc Raiders, there's different modifiers at different times. And so some of those modifiers are like loot modifiers. There'll be things like, oh, it's like a spring season. You'll be able to find like more herbs on the map, yeah, medicinal herbs, and you'll be able to use those to craft. And then one of the modifiers is that there's different raid bosses on the map. So the one from the preview, and I think David will be able to speak a little bit more about this, because David actually fought the Arc Queen during the preview, which is this like giant like multi-legged like walker boss, and it protects like a very valuable container.
And I want to say that when we squatted up together, I was more of the hunter-gatherer than the actual fighter, so this was a change of pace. It was basically, squad-based battles. They hooked me up with some Embark guys, and I think everyone, as the preview came to a close, everyone was on the same page about wanting to take on this queen, so it was maybe a bit unnatural of a situation, but we had like 15 to 20 guys all trying to hammer in on this queen at the same time, which had slow-moving rockets, a death laser, moved around and kicked, enemies. And I swear, I went through an entire inventory of bullets and grenades and whatever, 200 medium rounds from my assault rifle, didn't put a dent, like broke off a few fairings on legs, killed 2 of the 6 legs on this thing, and it was still up and running. So these will be very serious raid bosses that you will probably need to build your kit around, because a lot of the stuff, unlike other, I'm used to battle royales and picking up big guns on the ground, you need some really heavy weaponry to take these down.
But I'm assuming theoretically, though, everyone is fighting the boss. You could just be like an ass and just like shoot someone else and take them out if you like wanted to for some reason.
You could.
That is an interesting note, because it seems like one of the things that Arc Raiders is going to be good at is extraction shooters are, I think, really great at creating these like emergent narratives and like these dynamic kind of moments. And by throwing raid bosses in, especially like ones where like maybe you're not necessarily able, who knows, like, when the game's out for a while and people are like super kitted up, if you can do it with a squad, I'm sure some people are going to, like, really, really good players are going to be able to do it with a single squad. But it seems like you're going to need a lot of players to take on these raid bosses, and you're going to have to like forge bonds with random players around you who don't necessarily have your best interests in mind. And so in a private playtest, maybe you get 15, 20 people all working at the same time. Doing that in a real match is going to be a lot harder. And even if you work with 15 to 20 people in a real match and get them to work towards this common goal, once you accomplish that goal, who's to say that these people aren't going to turn on each other, especially since, there's a loot node that is being guarded by this boss, and, everyone's going to be converging on that loot node. So I think there's going to be like a really dynamic gameplay cycle that kind of is propped up by this end game content that I can't think that I've seen in any other extraction shooter so far.
Yeah, I can kind of picture a scenario where it's like, hey, we're all going to work together for that boss, but the minute that boss is down, like, we're enemies again, so you got to make sure you hang on to like a grenade or something, because who knows what's happening right after that. You had mentioned Marathon earlier, and again, we had just talked about it, and one of our comments from last week from Aragorn himself, thanks, is saying, hey, to be honest, it's going to close in 2026, 2027. We've talked about Concord, that closed immediately. It's really hard for live service games right now. Do we think Arc Raiders has legs?
I think that is a hard question because with live service games, especially in the extraction shooter genre, it's a very niche genre. Escape from Tarkov is super established in it. I think these are very different games, Escape from Tarkov and Arc Raiders. Escape from Tarkov, very mil-simmy, whereas Arc Raiders is definitely more for a casual audience. But even still, we've seen games like the Psycho Frontier, which is, I think, was more of a casual game, maybe somewhere in between Arc Raiders and Tarkov, and that game is dead now. Extraction shooters are just so niche that it's hard to have legs in this space, and there are definitely some design decisions that I'm a little bit apprehensive of with Arc Raiders. I'm not sure how they'll work out. One of which being that there's no inventory wipes in the game. With extraction shooters, a big part of the gameplay and balance loop for these games is that, every couple months, usually the developers will say, okay, everyone's had their fun, and they'll wipe the inventories, wipe the slate clean. I spoke to Embark Studios, and I was told that there won't be any wipes for this game, which I think is a double-edged sword. I think, on one hand, maybe that makes the game, increases the longevity a little bit, because people will feel like their time is respected more. They'll feel like the loot they worked hard at is in their hands rather than losing it is out of their hands. But I also think that the balance of the game could be heavily affected as, veteran players just collect more and more and more, and their inventories aren't wiped. So I think depending on that, I think that is maybe a linchpin decision that'll decide how far this game goes.
Thanks a lot, Tyler.
We will be at Summer Game Fest. That is the opening weekend of June, and we are going to get to play a lot of games. You're going to get to see a lot of upcoming stuff. Stay tuned here to watch our coverage of Summer Game Fest as it rolls out. We're really excited for all the upcoming games and can't wait to share them with you.